you do not deal with your emotional eating, you will never be successful with long-term weight maintenance. But you have to deal with it.
Is your appetite out of control?
What if you know how to lose weight? You just can't control your cravings.
I'm hungry, feed me.
You eat, and it feels like it didn't even touch the sides. You just feel like you're just this endless bucket that could just never be filled.
Your brain has a massive influence on your appetite, your hunger. Did you smell your food being cooked? Did it taste good? What kind of fork and what kind of plate did you eat off? All these things affect your perception of how full you were. The physiology, the hormones, is out of your realm. For people who have a lot of weight to lose, it feels a lot harder. What would be your top tips for somebody to manage their hunger if they were on a diet?
So my top tips would be... Hi, I'm Jamie.
And I'm Stacey.
And this is the Body Smart Podcast.
And today we are talking about the one life skill that you need, whether you are a child, an adult, on a diet, not on a diet, trying to gain weight, lose weight, maintain your weight. And that is understanding your appetite. And it's a lot harder than people think.
It's a lot harder than people think.
And we often hear people saying, oh, all you need to do if you want to lose weight is eat less, move more. But that also is a lot harder than people think. And one of the reasons is you get hungry. So
No shit. Yeah.
We thought it'd be pretty helpful to explain why you get hungry. I mean, obviously it's because you're eating less food, but understanding how the process of appetite works in your body and in your mind can be really helpful for you to then work with that process and make the whole experience a bit easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when it comes to hunger, it isn't all biological.
It's not.
There
Not
is a
at all.
stat out there which you often say about how much is psychological.
It's about 20% is physiological hunger. So when we genuinely feel hungry and are hungry, and about 80% is psychological. So it's in our minds, like we're telling ourselves that we are actually hungry. And that's why we use the acronym BLASTED, which is, are you bored, lonely, anxious, stressed, tired, emotional, or distracted? So it's a great way of going, if you ask yourself that question, like blasted, like am I any of those am I feeling any of those ways? Is that what's causing me to go to food? So you're working from home, it's 11 a.m, you've done a bit of admin work, you're a bit bored, and you're just like, oh, I could really use a snack. You know what I mean? You go and make yourself a cup of coffee and you get a snack, and there's nothing wrong inherently with that. However, if that's something that is repeatedly happening several times a day, and now you're having 1,500 calories from snacks because you're bored, and it's affecting your weight and affecting your mood and affecting your health, then that's something to address.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not just those emotions as well. So we're going to dive a bit deeper into the many psychological factors. But I actually thought it'd be really interesting. There's other names for psychological and physiological, which when I found out these are what they are called, I was like, oh, interesting. Because physiological, which is like body, biology, is known as homeostatic hunger. Which, when you think about it, homeostatic means your body's trying to stay the same. So when we think about like a child, for example, they're very naturally good intuitive eaters. Like you're not designed to just put loads of weight on.
You mean when they eat enough food and then just throw the rest on the floor?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or they just shout, no.
Yeah.
But like they intuitively know, actually that's enough for what my body needs right now. And we are programmed to try and keep our bodies at a set level. So whether that's your weight, but also like your body temperature or how much sleep you have, like our bodies like known factors. They like things to stay the same. So when you use that word for hunger, you're like, that makes a lot of sense. Homeostatic hunger wants me to just balance the energy that I've used to bring me back to that nice level and keep things as they are. And that's why actually most people will say, if they've never struggled with their weight, oh yeah, it's easy to maintain my weight. Because that's what your body would do if it was left to its own devices and there wasn't all these psychological elements. But the psychological element, this is the interesting one. The other name for that is hedonic.
Hedonic.
Yeah,
Yes.
which I was like, oh, it's a bit judgy. It's not all about just having ice cream and chocolate, is it? But if we think about the contrast of, right, my body's just trying to keep everything the same and keep things in balance, make sure I'm refilling my energy stores. And then your brain is like, let's have a party. Let's have all the fun stuff. Kind of explains why being on a diet is so freaking hard sometimes.
Oh, definitely. And I have it anytime and I have to almost like trick myself around what I'm doing. So if I ever wanted to, like I was going on holiday, I'm going to diet down or try and lose a little bit of weight or fat before like 2-3 weeks before I go away, the second I tell myself I'm quote unquote on a diet, it's like I'm instantly hungrier and like more ravenous, and it feels like food is scarce. And I have to just kind of ignore all those sort of feelings because I know it's a window.
There's actually, that's a legit thing. It's called cognitive dietary restraint. So when you tell yourself that you're going on a diet, your body physiologically reacts to those thoughts and it's like, oh my God, there's not enough food around. Quick, get all the food. That's a natural thing.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I mean, but it makes sense, doesn't it, from like a survival standpoint, that's the way it would be. So now I'm just like, oh, I'll just have a few less ingredients in this and I'll have less snacks. And I don't actually tell myself I'm trying to lose weight or trying to diet.
Yeah.
I'm just changing a little bit. And that makes the whole process like a hell of a lot less painful.
Yeah. So your brain has a massive influence on your appetite, your hunger, your experience of trying to adjust your diet. But I think it's really helpful to understand what's going on with the physiological first, because you can kind of, to a point, control your brain, but the physiology, the hormones, is out of your realm in a lot of senses. So let's understand those first, and then we can talk about like the stuff you can actually affect more. So you have got two main hunger hormones, which are ghrelin and leptin. Well, ghrelin is your hunger hormone, and I like to remember it like ghrelin is like a gremlin. So it's like, I'm hungry, feed me. And it's produced in your stomach and it tells your brain, right, go and find some food. Yeah. We need to get some food. And there's lots of things that can trigger it to be higher. One of the key ones that you can influence your ghrelin levels is sleep.
Of course.
So lack of sleep really affects your ghrelin levels, and protein. So high protein diets actually suppress your ghrelin levels as well. So there are things you can do to influence these hormones, but maybe not as much as the psychological stuff that we'll talk about later. And then the other one is leptin. So that's a satiety hormone. So that tells you after you've been eating for a little while, that's kind of your body saying, okay, yeah, we've probably had enough now. And it sends a signal to say, yeah, I'm full, we can stop eating. And that's produced by your fat cells, interestingly. So leptin communicates with your brain about your energy stores, hence why it's from your fat cells, because it's saying, right, yep, energy is back to that homeostatic balance. We're happy now, we can stop eating. And that's what's interesting is as your body fat changes, has an influence on these hormones. So you know when people say, oh, as I lose weight, it feels like it's even harder and I get even hungrier.
Oh yeah, definitely. I do, because you'll see like your leptin levels can be so low that, and if anyone's dieted for a long period of time, you will know that you've had this feeling where you eat and it feels like it didn't even touch the sides. So you just feel like you're just this like endless bucket that could just never be filled, and you could just eat and eat and eat and eat and eat and eat. And I think that's often a consequence. So it is the consequence of just your leptin levels being just like shot, just being really, really low. And it makes the dieting process from a physiological standpoint a hell of a lot harder.
And equally the other way around. So people with higher levels of body fat can actually end up with leptin resistance. It's a bit like insulin resistance. It basically means your body's sending the signal to say, yeah, we've had enough, but your brain doesn't register that signal. So you just keep eating. You don't have that natural off switch. And that can also be why for people who have a lot of weight to lose, it feels a lot harder than somebody who's maybe only got a couple of kilos to lose, because their body isn't really listening to the signals.
Well, I mean, like, coming back to, what do you say,
homeostatic,
hedonic, our body's always trying to remain a homeostasis, basically trying to stay where it's at. If you've been at a certain weight for a certain period of time, your body is always trying to get there. So anytime you try and move away from that to an extent, your body wants to bring you back to homeostasis. So it makes sense that happens a lot. A couple of kilos, not huge, but when you start to see big shifts in terms of, that becoming, 20 pounds, 30 pounds, 40 pounds, 50 pounds. And I guess that, the part here is like, yes, your body you will get certain signals. Some people are going to struggle with it more than others, down to genetics, down to food choices, down to lifestyle choices. But like, it is as well, to an extent, part of the process.
Yeah, it is. And like I said, there are a few things that you can do to mediate these effects of your hormones. So with your ghrelin, manage your sleep, go for that 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep a night, high protein diet. So we want to be aiming for like 25 to 30 grams of protein at each meal. And then for your leptin, you actually can really improve your leptin resistance with exercise. So don't know why, I'm not that much of a scientist, but the more you exercise, the better your brain is at listening to that signal that you're full. So there are very simple things you can do without massively changing your actual diet that can make your diet feel more satisfying, which is pretty cool.
It's pretty cool. I think it's, you know, when we look at appetite a lot of the times, and we're talking about here, it's this sort of through line that we always say is like, the more minimally processed foods that you have, the harder it is to an extent to overeat. You know, if you're having like lots of lean meats, lots of vegetables, maybe, you know, just like lots of like foods that are not processed at all, it does become really hard to overeat on those foods to the point where you could program a client or give a client a meal plan, and a meal plan isn't what we do for people, by the way. But like you could give them, and they could be like, this is too much food. You know, and you could literally get to a point where a person could go like, I can't eat all this food, even though the calories on the food that you've given them, it would help them lose weight. And it's like, if you think about that for a second, it's like, wait, I can eat so much food that I am so full and so satiated that I can't eat anymore. And it's like, yeah. And it's like, that's kind of like a bit of a cheat code and hack to making losing weight like less painful. Yes, you're not going to be maybe slamming back all these highly palatable processed foods that are maybe explosions of flavor in your mouth. You can still have a little bit of that, but it's just like, that's not going to make up the majority of your diet, maybe like how it has been.
Yeah. And I think it's really key to talk about that, what role the choices you make play in satiety, because it's really interesting. Although there are these hormones that register when you eat, oh yeah, now we're full, actually there's so much to do with like, does your food look visually appealing? Did you smell your food being cooked? Did it taste good? What kind of fork and what kind of plate did you eat off?
Yeah.
Like genuinely all these things affect your perception of how full you were. So again, there are things that you can do to help make your meals fill you up and feel better. You talked there about food choices and like volume foods are amazing. So that is things where you can eat like a whole plate of vegetables.
Yeah.
You get a lot of physical volume. Like imagine all those vegetables kind of in your stomach. Like literally visualize that right now. Of course you're going to feel full if you ate that many.
It's a huge amount of food, yeah.
But that would have probably been like 100 calories. Now, if we compare that to a high calorie density food, which is low in volume, so let's say 2 squares of chocolate, still 100 calories, is your stomach physically going to be full?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of these trends actually going around social media at the moment, where it shows like there's a straight line down the middle, when it shows like, I haven't eaten that much, and it's like 500 calories of food, and then it's like, I've eaten too much, and it's like this, or it's like 1,500 calories, should I say, and it's like 1 or 2 items, and then it's like the opposite is like 5 meals, a protein shake, and 3 snacks.
Yeah.
And I think they are really great visual representations of just showing, like, when you make smart food choices, you can actually feel like you're eating more food than you ever have, and you're losing weight, and that's like such a, like that, so much of being successful, I believe, with anything, like food, dieting, training, business, it's like, how do I make it easy? And it's like, if you can just like follow the through line of like, how is your default to just make it easy for you to achieve your goals? It's just not as painless. Like, oh, it's pain.
It is painless.
It is painless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, volume. If you don't know what is even a volume food, like you can't go wrong with veg, pretty much, especially non-starchy veg. So like sweet potatoes probably don't fall in this, but like most other vegetables, you can cram your plate full of them and for very low calories fill your stomach physically very well. The other thing when it comes to food choices is your macros.
I would also add that like lean meats.
You can eat like a lot of say prawns, shrimp.
Yeah, I've done it before. I've eaten just like mince. Try eating a pound of mince. No one's probably ever done that.
Ground beef.
Just me. It looks like dog food. Yeah.
Just straight up.
I just put a bit of salt on, and yeah, see, now I'm like not becoming relatable at all. I just see, you know what I mean? Like,
look at my face. Like, let's just go back to grilled shrimp, please.
Yeah,
with a bit of mango.
But yeah, like if you had like a plate of meat and vegetables, like you could eat like so much for 500 calories, to the point where you'd probably not want to eat anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. So that does lead on nicely to the macros conversation though, because you can't just live off vegetables. I mean, you can.
Yes.
A debate for another day. But they different macros. Obviously, they do different things for your body. So that's going to be your fats, your proteins, and your carbs. They all serve different roles in your body, and we need them all, actually. So as much as people will say you can do carnivore, you can do keto, honestly, for the most balanced, healthiest diet, you want to have a little bit of fat, a little bit of protein, quite a fair bit of protein, and some carbs. But how you balance them can make a real difference to how full you feel, because they take a different amount of time to digest. So if we think about what your body does in digestion, it takes a food, let's say a carrot. It takes a carrot and it breaks it down into molecules. Like, let's just take a second. That's quite a big process. Now, if you have got something that is really easy to digest, like honey, that would be a lot easier to digest than a piece of meat, for example. Obviously, if it's fuller in your tummy and it takes a long time to digest, you're going to be more satisfied for longer. So what are the things that take longer to digest?
I think the easiest way of thinking about this is it's going to be, again, more of your whole foods. Like, you know, it's like removing liquid calories, removing like doughy, soft food, like yogurt and stuff. Even though some of those can be more satiating, the more like one of the things that I like, and it's only a small change, but again, when I try to lose body fat, like I'll swap protein shakes for food, for like meat, and it's because sometimes I'd have 50-60 grams of protein from a protein shake, but it just even more full, especially if I want to do a more aggressive diet. If I actually eat the food, I have the sensation of spending 10 minutes of eating that meal instead of drinking it in 30 seconds. Then how much my body has to process it and break it down. Yes, it's getting the same amount of protein, but it's having to work a lot harder to digest the 50-60 grams of meat. So that's one.
And the actual macros themselves do take different amounts of time to digest.
Yes.
So carbs is only like 30 to 60 minutes to digest, but protein is 2 to 4 hours, and fat's actually the longest. So fat can take 6 hours to digest. So actually, if you think when you go for a snack, typically most people might go for, they're trying to be healthy, in inverted commas, a piece of fruit. Well, that's why within an hour you're like, oh, I need something else. I'm a bit snacky.
Yeah.
Whereas if you were to have a bit of protein with that or a bit of fat with that, actually it's going to tide you over maybe to the next meal a bit more effectively, because it's not going to be digested fully yet.
Yeah, I think this is like a bit of the lie we've all been told of like low fat products. Because I bought into that, you know, many years ago, of like, hey, like I'll just get everything that's like low fat because that's going to be better for my macros and it's going to be better, you know, like I'm going to better for my calories. But a lot of the low fat foods were like high in sugar. And when I actually moved back to having like full fat everything, like as natural as it could be, yeah, you know, calorie for calorie, portion for portion, there was more calories. But from a satiation standpoint, I felt so much better and didn't get the hunger spikes because there was no sugar, or next to no sugar. There was much more fat in there as well, and you felt much more satiated after having it. And I think, again, that just kind of comes back to, like, if you were to go full fat Greek yogurt, low fat Greek yogurt, the low fat Greek yogurt is processed or more processed. And the more and more you go down that processed food side of things, like typically, like the less satiating the foods are going to be.
Well, also the other thing is it's literally in the name. It's been processed for you. Whereas actually, if your body has to do the processing, that means the digestive process takes longer, which means you are fuller for longer.
Yeah. And you're also like missing out on, not missing out, but like you burn more calories by doing that as well. So because your body has to work harder, you burn more calories. Yeah. So it can, again, assist in seeing further weight loss.
Yeah.
So you kind of look at the bonuses of this just by making smarter food choices. You don't feel as hungry. You have more energy. You feel better. You look better, and like you burn more calories. It just again, it makes the whole process a hell of a lot easier to follow.
A lot easier. Yeah. You mentioned as well about like drinking your calories, and that's a big trap that people fall into because they think, oh well, I've got to get my protein, so I'll have a protein shake. Yeah. But even though it's protein and it's slower to digest than if they'd had an apple for a snack, for example, it still is processed. You know, you aren't having to physically break down the material of a piece of chicken. It's just swig it down and off it goes. And so that doesn't fill you up as long, but also your brain doesn't register as much that you've eaten because you've had a drink. And so our brains have been evolved to know when we do certain things, when we chew, when we like start to digest food in our mouth, because there's enzymes in our mouth that start the digestive process. All of these things start to tell the brain that we're full.
I'll laugh at this. So I knew about this when I was having protein shakes like a decade ago. And a tip that I got off someone, it was like, if you want to get more of those digestive enzymes from your mouth into your stomach to get more of those hunger signals, instead of just like chugging back your protein shake every shake that you'd have, you'd swill it around your mouth a bunch of times and then swallow it, and you'd wait a minute before you have your next. You wouldn't just go and swig it down. And it works. Like, I'm like, no shit. It kind of makes sense. But like, yeah, I was just giving me flashbacks. So basically just like, bringing just the shake in and out your mouth as much as you could through your teeth, so you would get more of that sort of process.
Although it is really bad for your teeth.
Yeah, I was about to say that. Yeah, I mean, I also don't want to like, I think with a lot of this, with hunger and appetite, like everything that we're saying here are obviously tips and like how you can go to like the extreme of managing appetite. In some cases, I think that is necessary, but it is a spectrum in the sense of like, some people you can, through genetics, through food choices, through environment, or whatever it is, or just like perception of how hard a diet should be, you might be on one end of the spectrum or the other. And like some of these, it might be useful to use every single thing that we're mentioning. And others, you might be like, hey, like actually get a protein shake in, helps me hit my protein goal, and I don't feel hungry. Great. It's like keep doing that if that works for you. But it's again finding that balance that works for you.
Yeah. It's pick a mix for which things you struggle with. But I definitely think those basics of like making sure you've got a mix of macros at every meal as well. So we actually had a great dietitian on a while ago, and she came out with this line, which I thought was brilliant. She was like, always dress your carbs. And she meant like, don't have naked carbs, as in don't have them on their own. So always have them with a protein or a fat.
Yeah.
Because I do think there is that tendency with snacks particularly. It's one of the things I kind of push clients to reassess how they structure their day with meals and snacks, because I do think we just have this psychology that a snack is a quick grab item, which tends to be a carb. And so if you actually just call it your fourth meal, it's much easier to think, oh, well, what would be in a meal? Well, I wouldn't just have a piece of fruit for a meal, would I?
Yeah.
And so you'd have like maybe a piece of cheese with it or something else to balance that out a bit more. And that can make a huge difference.
Yeah. I actually seen, Bethany, who was on the podcast recently, she just said that I've actually give up snacks to an extent, and I'm just having a fourth meal now.
Yeah, that's what I do.
It's just made such a significant difference. Yeah. I would also agree with that when it comes to the first meal of the day. I would say that's typically a meal where a lot of people, and so much of like win the morning, win your day. And it's just like, I can't really do believe in that mantra. Like if you can really get yourself in a good morning routine, have a good start to your day, get yourself in like good energy, have a good nutritious breakfast, if the rest of the day feels so much easier. You kind of have like a bad start to your day. And again, you don't want to like be so fragile that like a bad start to your day just dictates the whole mood for the day. But there's so many people for breakfast are just having carbs and fat.
Or just like say toast with honey, carb.
Yeah, and then wondering like why you're snacking again 2 hours later, why you're ravenous at lunch, and then and again it's kind of like there is a through line of you're choosing for that to happen, or maybe you're not consciously choosing, but like the patterns of behavior that you're in right now, or the habits that you've got, are definitely facilitating the physiological hunger that you're feeling all the time.
Yeah, definitely. One thing whilst we're on carbs, fiber. So carbs, by the way, are not the devil. That's not what we're getting at here. And part of that is because they contain a lot of fiber. So lots of carbs have got lots of other like micronutrients, vitamins, minerals that are great. But when it comes to feeling full, fiber is your friend. Yeah. Because it is hard to break down. It does slow digestion as well. So it does stop that food just going in one end and out the other. So a lot of whole food, well, pretty much all whole food carbs are going to have a fair amount of fiber in them. And that's, again, another reason to choose less processed options, but also to make sure you've got that balance on your plate. So you could just have a protein and fat snack, but maybe adding a bit of fiber will make that easier for your body to process as well because of the fiber.
Oh, definitely. It's if I were to, when I used to set people's calories and macros, the first thing I would be like, all right, here's your calories, here's your protein, carbs, and fats. And then over time, I was like, oh, it becomes a little bit more complex, for like a beginner. Then I just went for like protein and calories and protein. So that basically gave you like more wiggle room with your carbs and fat to an extent.
Yeah, because otherwise people fixate on like, how can I get my fat to the right number and my calories?
But I've added an extra one in now, which is I have the three focal points, if I were to simplify it as much as you could, to managing hunger and appetite would be calories, protein, and fiber.
Yeah.
And I feel like if you just have an appropriate protein goal, an appropriate fiber goal, and just try not to have like as many processed foods, like just by trying to hit the protein goal and trying to hit the fiber goal, you will just fill up the majority of your calories anyway by trying to hit those two numbers.
That's so true, because if you try and hit 30 grams of fiber with processed foods, you are going to struggle.
You're going to struggle. So you're like, what's got fiber in it? And you're like, okay. So now all of a sudden you're buying these high fiber foods, these high protein foods, and maybe they've taken up like 78% of your calories. If that happens, which it does for most people, like it's going to be a walk in the park. It's not going to be a walk in the park, but it's going to be a hell of a lot easier than something you've done before. So it's
also a different mindset of instead of being like, oh, I need to cut back on sugar, I need to eat less of this.
Yeah.
It's like, how can I get more? How can I get enough? Oh my gosh, I haven't eaten enough of this. It's such a different mindset. And particularly if you've spent like 50% of your adult life trying to eat less, cut down, cut out, actually it's really liberating to be trying to find more.
Yeah.
And it starts to, you want to learn more about your food and read the labels and find out what's in everything. So that would be a massive tip actually for anybody who's struggling with hitting a calorie goal. Eat more protein, eat more fiber.
Yeah. And if you want to work out how to do that, you could go onto our website on bodysmartfitness.com. You go into the calorie quiz, and that'll give you your calorie and protein goal for whatever it's maintenance or weight loss. And then a good rule of thumb to get what your fiber goal should be is, I would say, I used to say 10 to 15 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories. I've moved more to just higher numbers here, like 15 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories at a minimum. And there's not actually too much of an issue with going just like as a baseline as like 30. If you're not on, say, 2,000 calories a day, even 30 grams of fiber on 1,200 calories, 1,300 calories, 1,500 calories is not going to be sort of a bad goal. So if you were to get your calorie goal from the website, get your protein goal, and try to get to like 30 grams of fiber a day, you're going to be in a good spot.
And that's not just for satiety actually as well. So that 30 grams of fiber is recommended for general health, so gut health, but also like prevention of a lot of cancers, heart disease, bowel cancer. So even if you were like, I don't need to worry about my hunger level, probably have a look at your fiber anyway. If you haven't ever tracked how much fiber you eat in a day, you'd probably be quite shocked.
Yeah. And if you're maybe not, I mean, this is just another good test of like seeing how healthy you are, like actually looking at your stool. So actually looking at your stool and like it's the
Bristol stool chart.
The Bristol stool chart. So you can just like Google the Bristol stool chart and have a look at it. And you want to be having basically like a healthy poo, which is, how do they describe it? As like a long
firm
sausage. And you can laugh about it, and it is what it is, but it's not a bad thing. It's a good way of just like understanding, like if you're having like not the best poos or not going regularly on all the time, that's like often a sign that your body is telling you in some way that like, hey, like we're not getting enough nutrients, we're not getting enough fiber, and you got to think like if you're not going regularly and it's recommended to go regularly, what's happening there? You know what I mean? Where is that waste going or staying?
But a word of caution, if you don't eat much fiber and you suddenly increase it, you might have a little bit of an uncomfortable transition. So maybe increase it slowly.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely track it if you haven't ever tracked your fiber. So my mum got diverticulitis a couple of years ago, which is really common actually in women kind of 40, 50, 60s. And it's where part of your gut lining becomes like this little cul-de-sac, is how I describe it. So like food kind of gets in there and it can't get out. And then it just gets really inflamed and it's really awful and painful. And one of the main things they recommend to prevent it is lots of fiber, because if you've got lots of fiber moving through, everything's moving through regular, there's less likely for little bits to get stuck. And my mum started tracking her food to make sure she was getting enough fiber, not for calories or anything. And she was getting like 10 grams of fiber a day.
I wouldn't be surprised if that's like quite a lot of people.
Yeah.
You do, unless you have like a really whole foods diet. And even then, sometimes you still have to be.
She still eats. She was eating fairly whole foods.
You still have to be quite mindful about it.
Yeah. And it's just little swaps or like little things. So now she literally has an apple every single day. I wonder if that's where that saying came from. An apple a day keeps the doctor away. So she has an apple every single day.
Yeah.
You know, they have like brown bread instead of white bread. Little swaps. But you would definitely be surprised. I think the average person coming into Body Smart as a client would probably be about 15 grams a day.
if that sometimes, honestly.
Yeah.
It can be really, really low. And I love the examples there are just like really, like you can be like, hey, we're still going to get bread, but we're going to get a more seeded bread or a more whole grain bread or whatever. And you can honestly just look at the back of the packet. It's like, oh, I can just swap that for that. And now I'm getting an extra, 2.5 grams of fiber per slice of bread, and I have 2 a day. Boom, easy 5 grams. And just like little things. Oh, I typically have yogurt. Oh, I'll add a couple of blueberries and raspberries. And it's actually, you need quite a lot of berries, but they're actually really low on calories, which helps with what we're talking about here, which is appetite. And so then again, you're now having your yogurt, but maybe instead of having honey, or maybe having less honey, you're having berries on top. You're getting loads more food, more volume taken up in your stomach, more fiber. And again, you're going to feel really satiated off the back of that.
So overall, fiber is a thumbs up.
Yes.
Ever wondered why losing weight seems so hard after you hit 30? You're not alone. At Body Smart, we specialise in helping women like you over the age of 30 to lose 30 to 60 pounds in less than 6 months. Guaranteed. And that's without restrictive diets or endless hours in the gym. Our approach works because it's delivered through customised, direct, one-on-one coaching. Your coach will tailor a fully personalised plan that fits into your life, focusing on sustainable habits, not temporary fixes. On average, our clients lose 5 to 10 pounds a month, and that's not an outlier. That's what you can expect to achieve month in, month out. And yes, these results are guaranteed. Ready to see for yourself? Visit bodysmartfitness.com to apply. Remember, we're here exclusively for women over 30 who are serious about taking charge of their health. Apply at bodysmartfitness.com.
So we've talked about digestion, we've talked about hormones. There's another kind of physiological factor when it comes to appetite, and that is your circadian rhythm. And we talk about it a fair bit because it really does affect so many things when it comes to your body. And it basically means your body has a cycle every 24 hours that it likes to follow. And that cycle triggers different things that are supposed to happen. So like, for example, in the morning, you're supposed to get a little natural cortisol peak to wake you up for the day, get you going. It also affects your appetite. So you might be thinking, okay, great. Well, there's this 24-hour cycle. What do I do about it? Yep. But there are things that you can do to affect it. So the biggest one is sleep, which we've talked about already. But also,
very, very much trying to go to bed within, I'd say, about an hour of like the same time and getting
actually,
up within
we
the same
didn't talk
time.
about that point, did we?
Yeah,
it's not
so,
just getting 8 hours sleep.
No,
it's when you get the sleep.
Yeah, it's when you get the sleep. So the closer you can keep your timings to the same, going to bed at the same time, getting up at the same time. And everyone who's ever worked had to have a really strict routine knows this, because what happens on Saturday morning when you get to sleep in, it's like, wide awake, 6 a.m. Why am I awake at 6 a.m. on a Saturday?
Yeah.
And even if you go to bed later sometimes, your body still just autopilot.
Anyone with kids who's had a babysitter for the night still wakes up at 5.
Yeah, and you're just like, why? So, it's like you do have this natural inbuilt clock, but the closer you can get to that, for me, like Steph has got the superpower where she can just sleep. Like she could just sleep for 10 hours, 12 hours, as much as she wants to and doesn't wake up. I don't. I like wake up. If I've been getting up at 6 a.m., I will wake up at 6 a.m. So the only way I typically can get more sleep is to go to bed earlier, because I just typically will wake up at that time. So again, it's like it's knowing that to an extent, but the more you play into that, like it's just like the better you feel as a human being.
So regular bedtimes and wake up times, not just wake up times, is important.
And the where people go wrong the most on this, which is like a shock, the weekends, because again, you want to sleep in a little bit more on the weekend, and again, like an hour maybe. But if you then go to bed 3 hours later on a Friday and then get up 2-3 hours later on a Saturday and then do the same Saturday night, Sunday, then when it comes round to Monday, it's so much harder to get up again. And stuff like that is going to have a knock-on effect on your appetite.
Definitely. And it does have a knock-on effect then on meal times. And then your body, if you eat regularly at 12 o'clock midday and then on a weekend you get up late, so then you have breakfast late, so then you have lunch late, throws all that out of whack as well. So then you start feeling hungry when you wouldn't normally be hungry, or it wouldn't be a meal time. So fixed meal times is really helpful if you are trying to manage your appetite and your hunger. And then the other one to manage your circadian rhythm, it sounds a bit like woo-woo, but it's legit, is getting more daylight, sunlight, and particularly in the morning. Because if you think about it, we're not evolved to live in apartments with like small windows or go and work in an office all day. We are evolved to be outside, and the sun and the 24-hour cycle comes, like that's where it comes from, that we have a circadian rhythm.
Yep.
So the more you can expose your body and your eyes to that natural daylight helps your body realize, oh, it's daytime, oh, it's morning time. Okay, let's get back into sync with the way things should be. So it is recommended 15 to 30 minutes of morning daylight is really helpful to get your circadian rhythm regulated and keep it regulated. And it doesn't have to be, I would love to say everybody go for a 30-minute walk every morning.
Yeah.
That isn't realistic for some people, but if you could maybe do like a 15-minute walk and then maybe sit with the window open in front of the window, looking out the window whilst you have your breakfast, even if that's all you can do.
You can even get you've got one, haven't you? A sad lamp. A sad lamp, yeah, and that just has a huge impact as well. I'm not 100% sure on this, but I think exercise can have a similar impact as well. So
on circadian rhythm.
If you wake up and exercise straight away too.
I mean, it's not going to be bad for you.
It's not going to be bad for you, and it's a good time to get it done. It's one of the times I actually opt for training at home because I just can open the garage door, so I feel like I'm getting the benefits of both. You know, I'm training, I'm exercising, and I'm getting the sunlight. Versus, you know, when you go to a gym, and sometimes it's dark. You know, if you go in the gym at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning as well, there is that side of it. But yeah, I believe there is some impact of exercising as well on circadian rhythm first thing in the morning.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised because it's going to cause that change in hormones, that response in your body. Yeah, Sai's just done some Googling for us. It says, in general, exercise plays an important role in regulating circadian rhythms. Exercise at night delays your circadian phase, which can make it harder to fall asleep. But the effect of daytime exercise is more controversial. Wow, that's maybe another whole episode.
Yeah. But, you know,
but don't do it at night, according to this.
I mean, I typically find, because if you look at, like, what would you say is probably like one of the number one things that could disrupt circadian rhythm?
Sleep.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, but like what could affect that?
Stress.
I'd probably say kids and flying. Jet lag is another one.
Shifts.
So yeah, shift work. And you know, typically any time I fly now, the best way I get over jet lag is like I get up and the first thing I do is like go and exercise, and I feel like that kind of resets me the best that I can. I try not to do anything like crazy. Like I'm not going to do like an intense heavy weight session where I'm pushing for PBs, but I try and get my heart rate above 130 beats per minute, and keep it there, and then do that for like 45 to 60 minutes. It's like a good cardio, like aerobic exercise to do, cardiovascular exercise, and I just find that like it just resets my body. That heaviness you get from the jet lag, changing in time zones, and it's such a great reset to do because you want to enjoy your trip. You don't want to feel jet lagged for a couple of days, and same when you come home. It's just kind of trying to realign that circadian rhythm as fast as you can.
Just to link back to what we're talking about today, actually, if you think about how you often feel when you've been on a long flight, is you feel a bit drained, you feel a bit lacking in energy, and there is a tendency to grab something quick and maybe not very balanced at the airport or on the plane, not drink enough water. So you probably are a bit hungrier, or you feel like you should eat.
Yeah.
When actually what you want is energy, and doing a workout will energize you.
Yeah.
So you achieve the end like game without actually the food you didn't need in the first place.
Yep.
So I guess that kind of brings us on to reasons that you want food when you don't actually need it for hunger reasons. Because we have covered a lot already, and you'd be surprised to hear maybe like that's actually like the small easy bit of hunger. So sorry, psychological impacts on eating. We've talked about emotions already, and I think most people listening can probably relate to one of those. Do you want to just list them again?
So blasted is going to be, are you bored? Are you lonely? Go on. Are you bored? Are you lonely? Are you anxious? Are you stressed? Are you tired? Are you emotional? Or are you distracted? Which is blasted. We used to have we kind of made this one up. I believe we made this up.
The Holt method.
Yeah, the Holt method, which is, are you hungry? Are you angry? Are you lonely? Are you tired? But obviously that's like
pretty limited.
It's a pretty limited amount of emotions. So we tried to make blasted to just encompass more, in essence, to just really understand like all these emotions are what's driving you towards food, because emotional eating is a huge problem that a lot of people struggle with. And you can definitely actually find sometimes with appetite, it can go two ways. I tend to find with clients, and even with myself to an extent, if you're like mildly stressed, you can turn to food as a way of comfort. But for me, if I get really stressed, my appetite goes, and they both have consequences. One is like you could just be over consuming on calories, like just a numb emotion to an extent. Not great if you don't want to slam 2,000 calories in chocolate and ice cream. But then the other one is you've got no appetite at all. And typically people who struggle with food go, oh, I wish that was the case. I'd just be a skinny bitch or whatever, or whatever else. And it's like, actually, if you don't eat all day or like for 80% of the day, you'll wake up the next day, you're probably burning extra energy from all that stress that you're carrying around and anxiety. You get up the next day, you feel battered. You feel absolutely shattered because you've not eaten. So even when I have felt like highly, highly stressed, having that awareness that your appetite is being suppressed, and sometimes I will just actually go and like force eat, and when I actually start eating, I actually have a bit of an appetite then at that point, but I don't feel it up until that point. And I think that just comes back to like self-awareness or awareness of self, of like, what is going on right now?
Yeah.
How am I reacting to the situation?
I've got friends that actually set alarms to eat because if they get stressed or too busy, they just literally forget.
And the ideal thing is obviously address the stress or address the lifestyle issues, especially if that's becoming a constant through line for, you know, months or even years in some cases. Like that is definitely, it's like, hey, this isn't changing.
Yeah.
Something is going to have to change, or your body will over time might force you to change, which is never the nicest route to go down. So yeah, having awareness of both is really helpful. But yeah, blasted is a good place to start if you find yourself overeating.
It is, and I think particularly because most people can probably relate to stress eating, male and female, I think.
Yeah.
But maybe those other emotions, not so much. Maybe sad. People might think, oh yeah, I know, I like grab a bit of chocolate when I'm feeling sad. But things like lonely might not be something that jumps straight to mind when people are just snacking or sitting in front of the TV and they just feel like they just want something. That might not be a connection that you make. So I think really going through that list is helpful because it brings up questions that you probably haven't asked yourself before.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be the first to admit that, like, I don't like being, like, I like being on my own, but I don't like being lonely.
Nobody does.
I don't think anyone does. Yeah, of course. But I like, maybe because I've come from like a family of 4, and there was like, sometimes there'd be no one in the house, but you'd always knew there was someone coming back. It was a very busy household. And yeah, like sometimes when like if Steph's away for like the weekend and stuff, like it's fine. But like if there's ever like long periods of time, like I personally don't like it. And I might pick on you again today, Si. I think it said loneliness is becoming like one of like the biggest issues that we're facing as an aging society to an extent.
Yeah.
And the issues that
it's quite a big killer, they say.
It is. It's a really big killer. Yeah. And it's you know, it's one of the things that like when people's partners die when they get older, there's a certain effect of, you know, the fact that like the other partner ends up, you know.
Well, they say like they died of a broken heart, don't they?
Yeah, like I think that's actually an actual thing, like broken heart syndrome or whatever else. So yeah, like social connection and like spending time with people is like so paramount for our health and well-being.
Yeah.
When you watch, I brought it up the other day, the Blue Zones, again, there's like some very through lines around what these people were doing. A lot of whole foods, walking a lot, spending time with people all the time, you know, spending social time, being outside.
Yeah.
Again, these are just like wired into our sort of bodies and DNA and physiology and psychology in so many ways. So yeah, and I mean, like, you know, you could be listening and be like, well, fix my loneliness, Jamie. And it's like, yeah, I think...
yeah, but you joke about it, but that is often the kind of actions we will work on with clients. So it will be like, right, we've identified the reason you've struggled to stick with your calories the last 2 weeks is because you've been alone in the evenings and you find that uncomfortable. So you want to change your state, so you reach for some food. Okay, so let's start planning in some like lunches or dinners with girlfriends. Let's start going to an art class. Let's start finding things. And that will be an action from a coach to a client that's nothing to do with hitting your calories from the outside. But actually in practice, doing those things means those little snacky bits don't happen.
Exactly, because you're not one-dimensional
No.
as a human being. You know what I mean? There's so much more to that, and we've had this in the team where, you know, we've had to coach certain people in the team that have been struggling because working from home has been a new experience, and we've had it with clients as well. And you see it. It's like it's sometimes things can happen and people decide to go inwards. They go like, hey, this traumatic things may be happening in my life right now, and I'm just gonna like stay from home and I'm just gonna work and I'm just gonna do this. And then very quickly, you know, within a couple of weeks, like that person can start to break to an extent. And what can that affect? It can affect their appetite. It can affect how much they overeat. And again, just like becoming more of a recluse just starts to hurt you more and more and more. And you have to make a conscious effort. Like, can you go to group classes? Can you see friends? You know, can you make more of an intentional conscious effort to like satisfy this like human need?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so these are things that might feel uncomfortable to deal with as well, which is why we turn to food. Because when we eat particularly nice sweet food, we get a little serotonin hit, we get a nice fuzzy warm feeling. So rather than deal with the actual issue, which is a bit awkward and uncomfortable, we don't really want to even think about it, let alone have to take the uncomfortable actions to deal with it, like getting out there and going and seeing people, or dealing with a stressful situation at work rather than just being stressed and letting that continue. You know, these are kind of quick fixes that we've learned work.
Yep.
And that's why it's so hard to break emotional eating patterns, because you have evolved over however many years and found, oh, actually, when I feel like this and I eat something, I feel better. Win.
Yeah.
So what we've got to do is really unpick what we're trying to solve in the first place, find a way to solve that problem that doesn't feel like a massive obstacle in itself. So emotional eating is a big topic, and it is something that can have the biggest impact on, if you struggle with being on a diet, inverted commas, or weight management, actually dealing with emotional eating can be life-changing. And we've talked about like negative emotions and stress.
Sorry, can I just stop you a second?
Yeah.
I fundamentally agree, after doing this for so long now, that if you do not deal with your emotional eating, you will never be successful with long-term weight maintenance. Like, you have to deal with this. And as uncomfortable as that is, you have to deal with it. If you don't, it will just resurface again. You might be able to block it out for a certain amount of time, or a certain period, or a certain time frame or challenge you've got in your head. But if you do not deal with this, like, it just will resurface and start to just, and we've seen it where it can, you know, clients can be successful and then it can just like undo so much of that hard work, because yes, it is uncomfortable and you'll have those uncomfortable conversations, but the sooner you sort of work through that and start to understand these strategies and coping mechanisms that are going to work specifically for you, just the happier and healthier you will get as a whole. And then when you actually get to your goal, maintaining it when these uncomfortable emotions come again, because they will, that is life, they will come, you have the coping mechanisms and strategies in place to be able to deal with it. And that just means the success chance of you being able to lose weight and keep it off, it just goes through the roof.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another thing, if somebody has a kind of an easy run of it, so to speak, they actually kind of miss out learning those skills. And it's actually better for somebody to learn how to deal with the difficult times so that they've got those tools down the road.
Yeah. That's, I think I've said this many times on this podcast, I would much rather, over like a 12-month period of someone coaching, you know, you think like, oh, dream client would just be a smooth sailing right the way through. If that happens to someone, they've had a very good run of luck in life, I would say, and great for them. But I would be more concerned about them because they haven't had maybe enough challenges. Rather, you know, someone's gone through this, they've got sick, you know, a flipping child ended up breaking a leg, and that threw them off emotions. And then, you know, Christmas was more difficult than anticipated. Mother-in-law was a prick, you know, whatever you want to say. Let's just say it was like a year, and you know what, but you still got through it and still got results. Guess what happens when them things happen next year? You've been here before, you know what to do. And then what happens next year? It gets easier. By the third year, you just expect it, you know how to deal with it, and it doesn't rock you. And the more you can do that, the more you get to like just being like unfuckable. And I just mean that in the sense of like, these things can happen, they don't even shake you anymore. And that's such a strong place to be for resilience.
Definitely. So as I was saying, this is all very negative.
I don't believe Steph's mother-in-law was, oh my God, I'm just going to retract that straight away now. It was just examples. I know some people do not like their mother-in-laws. So cheers to you.
Moving along. It's not all bad.
Yeah.
As in, it's not all bad emotions. No, actually, let me just rephrase that, because no emotion is bad. This is a whole nother tangent. Again, a whole nother podcast episode. Every emotion is trying to tell you something. So let me just rephrase that. There are emotions with negative connotations. So things like being lonely, stressed, tired, emotional, whatever. But people actually also emotionally eat or hedonically eat for positive emotions. So if you think about like, oh, it's somebody's birthday.
Yeah.
Oh, we've all got cake. Are you actually hungry, or are you having it to celebrate with that person?
Very true. Yeah. Thanksgiving, Christmas.
Yeah. Or going out for dinner with friends. Everyone's having starters and a main. You're going to have starters and a main. Or going out for drinks with friends. You end up having an alcoholic drink when actually if you were sat at home, you would just have a chamomile tea. So there are lots of positive emotional associations with food and drink as well.
Yeah.
So it's really important if you want to understand why maybe you're finding it tricky to stick with a calorie deficit or, you know, follow a diet, and you think, well, I don't emotionally eat, maybe look at the positive emotional associations as well. Because I have had so many clients, you know, people get labels thrown around like weekend warrior or whatever. And it is that positive association with food where I'm going to celebrate with food. I'm going to let my hair down with food. That all kind of comes under the same umbrella. And if you're not doing it consciously, that's when it feels like, why can't I stick to this?
Yeah.
When you know, actually, I associate celebration with food and drink, or I associate whatever with food and drink, that's when you can start to take action and change it. So it's awareness is what you need to cultivate, shall we say.
Yeah.
So that kind of touched on as well, like the normative cues of being around other people, following, fitting in with the group, following social norms. And there's lots more than just emotions. So there's a lot to do with satiety and hunger, which is around what our eyes are telling us, nothing to do with our tummies. And that can even be down to, there's a really cool book I read. I can't even remember the name of it.
It was that good. Yeah.
It was that good. It was really good, but it was basically a collation of all these studies that have been done of like why we overeat.
Yeah.
And there was this study where they had like the Super Bowl on and they gave everyone chicken wings, and it was like endless chicken wings.
Yeah.
So they had a bunch of tables where they just kept bringing out plates of chicken wings, and they just left the ones with all the bones on the plates, and they kept bringing more though until people said, no, I'm full, let's stop. And then on the other tables, they took the empty plates with the wing bones away. So there's a clear table and new plates came along. The people who had clear tables ate so much more because their eyes didn't tell them, oh my gosh, look how much you've already eaten. We should probably stop.
Yep.
So even things like that can make a huge difference.
Terry brought this up on a Christmas episode.
Oh,
I think
yeah.
it's the same book. Because it's the exact same example. And was there a soup example in there as well?
Oh, yeah, the soup one's hilarious.
Where the soup just didn't go down. They just kept filling it back up.
Yeah, they made like this special bowl where, as people were scooping soup out of the bowl, it was like somehow magically refilling itself. People ate like 75% more soup.
Yeah.
But they didn't think they'd eaten more and they didn't feel more full. That's the crazy bit.
Yeah.
Because your eyes were saying, we've still just eaten a bowl of soup. And that's really fascinating because your perception of how much you've eaten has a huge role on what you'll go on to eat at your next meal, how long you think you're full for between meals. So if you're on a diet and you have a little like breakfast bar for breakfast, thinking, right, that'll see me till lunch, your brain's going, we've only had a little bar for breakfast. And so you're more likely to at 10 o'clock think, right, I really need some food subconsciously. Even though in your head you think, well, I've actually had 300 calories of food in that meal replacement, but I don't actually need any more. So it is really, really important that you have all of these cues that match up with what you're feeding your body, is what your brain, your eyes, your nose, everything should match up if you want to be successful.
Yeah, it's a holistic approach in terms of setting those things up for success. And I think that just, again, is like that through line of like self-awareness, priming your environment for success. It's all going to have a huge impact on, like, I mean, I guess a question at you, like how does your appetite affect your life?
So I have had a very, all of these things have been a journey for me, hence why I am where I am now. I now would say I very much intuitively eat, and if I don't eat a balanced protein-rich breakfast, I snack in the middle of the day. That then creates a spiral of like not really being hungry enough for lunch, and then I don't really eat a good enough lunch, and then I snack in the afternoon. So I'm very self-conscious of that, and so I make a big effort to eat balanced meals. So although I say I'm an intuitive eater, it's within the framework of what I know works for me. Yeah. Because if I don't set the framework there, I am still human. Like my brain and my body still tell me things that aren't necessarily true. But it's knowing that those are just signals and I don't have to listen to them or act on them per se. I don't ignore them, but I can take that signal of I want a biscuit at 10 a.m. to mean that's because I didn't have a proper breakfast, not, oh, I'm really hungry, I should actually eat the biscuit. Yeah. However, there have been times when, you know, you do get into a habit, and it was probably about a year ago, I got into a habit of my son finally started napping without me having to push him in a stroller or like hold him. And I was like, oh, I'm going to sit and have a cup of tea and a biscuit. Oh, this is great.
Yeah.
And it became a thing. Like every afternoon, I was just having a cup of tea and a biscuit, or 3 or 4. And after about 5 weeks, I was like, seem to be putting a bit of weight on here.
What's going on?
What's going on? And I realized, oh, I've just like gained this habit.
Yeah.
And it didn't feel like I was eating more because my brain was like, oh, it's just a cup of tea and a biscuit.
Yeah.
But actually, that was probably like 200-300 calories a day extra.
Yeah.
So I'm still human. I still have to proactively manage the way I eat in order to eat in a way that serves me. But it's only because I've learned all of these skills and all of that knowledge about how my body works and how nutrition works that's possible.
Yeah.
So I'm really hoping today's episode will get people on that right path where they feel they can start to build their own framework.
Yeah, and it's a journey of like, I think again the big thing there was just like self-awareness, because I think another time, especially since you mentioned kids, where that can happen is people start eating their children's leftovers.
Oh yeah.
And that's another way. It's like, how am I gaining weight? And it's like, you've been eating like an extra 400 calories in your kids' food. And
it's
again,
so easy. I do that as well.
But being able to stop, like you said, 5 weeks there that went on for, but you were able to go, why is this happening in 5 weeks? You were able to investigate, understand why, and then change the course of that instead of that being 5 months and be like, hey, how have I gained 15 pounds or 10 pounds?
That's actually a really interesting example and point, because that wasn't because I was stressed or emotional that I was having the cup of tea. It was that positive association of like, I can have a cup of tea and a biscuit. You know, that isn't what people think of when they think of emotional eating. But for me, that's still very much emotional eating. It's like celebrating my peace. So I had to then find something else to do in that window. Like I can still have a cup of tea. And actually, you know what? All I did is I swapped from having like a English breakfast builder's cup of tea to having a herbal tea, because biscuits just don't really go the same way with a chamomile tea. So I don't want the biscuit. Isn't that weird?
Yeah, I mean, it's constantly just being curious to find those changes and strategies that like what's going to work for you.
Yeah, definitely. And that is kind of, it ties in with that hedonic hunger that we were talking about earlier. It's like, what makes me feel good? Do I still need to eat that thing to make me feel good? Because that's a question that people don't necessarily ask themselves. I've had clients who've been like, oh, you know, I always want to have this certain thing when it's a birthday, or I always want to come in after work and have cookies or whatever. And then we realize, actually, there's probably like 3 or 4 other foods that give me that same, often it's crunchiness, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So people who want like chips, crisps, they want that crunchiness. Carrot sticks, weirdly, often does the trick.
Carrots and some hummus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, again, that sensation of like crunching, your brain's like, oh, this is satisfying.
A lot of those foods, and I think it's just important to always just remind people that it's all made by design. Like the crunch, the taste, the smell, the explosion of taste and smell and flavor on each bite. Like it is purposefully designed to hack every sort of system in your brain for you to just keep going more and more and more and more and more. And if you do find that you really enjoy some of those, there's probably a natural alternative, as you just mentioned, that you can go with. And yes, you know, carrot sticks and hummus aren't as sexy as, you know, a bar of chocolate or something that you like a crunchy bar or whatever you might like. But still, like, you know, the hummus sticks and carrot, the hummus and carrots are going to make you feel so much better at 12 o'clock than eating, you know, 2 bars of chocolate or something.
Yeah. Oh, one of my friends made this amazing salad at the weekend, which I was like, how have I never thought of this? Roasted chickpeas are the best like crunch thing of like a healthy option. You just literally put them on a tray, a little bit of olive oil, and roast them, and they're literally like little crunchy, amazing flavor bombs. And she just scattered them into the salad, and so every mouthful of salad, you got like this little crunch. It was great.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Little tip.
I digress.
Yep.
One more thing that I wanted to just cover on this, like kind of emotional, normative eating is eating with other people.
Yes.
And I said about earlier, you know, you kind of feel the peer pressure maybe sometimes to eat a bit more, but actually there's a real subconscious element to eating with other people. And there was a study that I was looking at where it was like people generally tend to fall into a few camps. So people who choose to eat alone most of the time, or people who would choose to sit with colleagues or with family.
Yep.
And that's fine. Like that's your normal preferred way of eating. The people who normally eat with other people consume 60% more in this study.
Who sit with other people?
Yeah.
Wow.
And one thing that I always say to clients is when you're out, your focus should always be either on the people you're with or your food. Because if you are trying to do two things at once, your brain can't clock. You're just spooning that food in. And equally, you have a nicer time with your friends if you actually focus on them when they're talking, not constantly thinking, oh, should I be eating the food or have I had too much food? So a really simple rule that I say to clients is at any given time, choose like fully engage in the conversation or focus on your food for this mouthful. And it really helps A, slow you down so you don't wolf it down without realizing, and B, also just be more present in the situation. And that means you don't feel like you're missing out when you've only eaten half your plate because you've really enjoyed your meal out, which is really often more about being with the people rather than the food.
Yeah.
And you enjoyed the food because you paid attention to the mouthfuls that you did eat.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think another little hack for that too is I know a lot of our clients use this, especially in the beginning when it comes to eating out, is like looking at the menu before you go. So you're able to pick some of the foods, kind of takes away that like extra decision fatigue of maybe being rushed when you're there or maybe not. And then you know what you're going to have. And then that again just helps manage calories, manage portions before you even get there.
Yeah, and actually you talked about drinks. That's another one that's really easy to overdo. So in this study as well, people drank more alcohol and ate more salt randomly when they were with other people. I don't know if it's because they were looking around when they were putting their salt on their meal. I don't know why that was. But yeah, there's just so many things that if you're just not paying really specific attention, it's so easy to overdo without noticing. So how can we bring it all together? What would be your biggest top tips for somebody to manage their hunger if they were on a diet?
My top tips would be making sure you get enough protein. Protein is extremely satiating. Get enough fiber. We spoke about that, around 15 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories, but at least 30 is a good sort of start. One we haven't touched on is water. A lot of people are chronically dehydrated, not drinking enough water. 2 to 3 litres, which is like 66 to 100 ounces a day, is ideally what's recommended. More if you're in a really warm climate or you're super active. They're really going to help. We spoke about sleep, trying to get that 7 to 9 hours of sleep is going to be really important as well. And your circadian rhythm. So trying to go to bed and get up at the same time within an hour. So if you go to bed at 10 to 11, if you get up at 6 to 7, they're like good rules of thumb to try and get your circadian rhythm in a great place. And then I think the through line of everything we've spoken about today is mindfulness. Being mindful, being self-aware, being intentional around the choices that you're making, whether that's when you're eating out, whether that's with the foods that you're buying, just being mindful and getting curious when things aren't going your way. So if you're constantly feeling hunger, get curious and become self-aware around why. Why is that happening? Because you will typically be able to see a through line of like, I'm getting really hungry at 1 o'clock because my breakfast is full of sugar, full of fat, it's got no carbohydrates and no fiber in it. Right. Can I make some simple changes to that meal? Let's try that out. A week goes by, not hungry at 1 o'clock anymore. Hey, like, great, success. Move on, like you're fine now. Cool, keep doing it. If you're not, move on to the next thing. And the more you just keep getting curious, as we're always saying, like focus on getting 1% better in these small little aspects, it just makes a significant difference over a couple of months.
Yeah, definitely. One thing we haven't covered as well, which you did allude to there, is mindful eating.
Mindful eating.
I did just want to add that in because people often think that means like sitting in a quiet room with music on and like savoring every bite and thinking about the colors of. I mean, you can go on YouTube and you can find mindful eating tutorials that will be like that. But actually, all we mean is paying attention to your food, taking your time over your food and being mindful to how your food affects you. So if you go into a meal and you had a scale of 1 to 10 of being hungry and 10 was like, oh my gosh, I'm so full, I could be sick right now. And you went into your meal at like a 3 or a 4, like pretty empty, pretty hungry. Pay attention because you will start to rack up through that scale. When you get to like a 6 or a 7, each mouthful, you just need to check like, is that enough now? Is that enough now? Because most people only need to get to maybe a 7 or an 8 and then that's enough food.
And for you, like high performers out there, you do not want to eat past that. You do not want to eat past that like sort of 6 or 7 point because the energy slum and drop that you have afterwards, it's just like you're not going to go back into work and like perform well. Like you're just going to be slower. You're going to want to have a nap or you're going to want to lie down. Going for a walk can definitely help with digestion after that. But like, when you start eating to that like 8, 9, 10, sometimes I will eat like that, like of an evening, last meal of the day, and if I've got the calories there. But like most of the time, no, I'm trying to eat to. I feel full, but I'm not stuffed. Is where I'm going for.
And actually, even if you have never paid attention to this, once you do pay attention and you've stopped yourself at 7 or 8 a few times, people are often like, oh, I can't believe how awful I used to feel after eating. And now I'm like, oh, I can actually go and do something. I don't feel like I just have to sit here and let my food digest.
Yeah.
And it's a weird change for some people because they've always just resonated with like, eat everything on my plate, feel absolutely stuffed. That's just what meals are. And particularly if you grew up with parents that were like, everything on your plate must go.
Yep.
Which we actually were talking about earlier, weren't we, with our cameraman? And
Yeah.
he's like, yeah, I can just leave, you know, one chip on my plate if I'm full. I think
Which,
you
yeah.
and me had very similar upbringings where it was like, don't you dare leave a chip.
I mean, yeah. I mean, like, again, I've got another friend who can literally leave like one mouthful left. And I'm looking at his plate like, there's no way you're not going to eat that. And he's like, yeah, I'm full. And I'm like, weird. Well, you know what I mean? But like,
Actually, that's the goal.
that is the goal, yeah. And you do, like we said, you see this in children. You actually see this in animals as well, by the way. Like, there's
my dog like leaves his food for days sometimes.
The only time you get fat dogs is because people are feeding them. If dogs were left in the wild, they wouldn't get get fat.
And we're feeding them processed shit.
Yeah. So, you know, it is one of those things. That is the goal. You want to get to that point where you can get to that point and say, I'm full, and stop. And if you feel like that's like a million miles away, just start with a couple of the things that we've mentioned on this podcast today, and just start to incorporate one at a time. And you'd be surprised. Yes, it's not a fast process, but over a long enough time horizon, you can too also get to that point where like hunger and appetite becomes less and less a thing of the past.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be food is the only thing you're thinking about when you're on a diet if you can master these skills.
Yeah.
This was a great deep dive into some of the physiological reasons that weight loss can feel a struggle. And if you love learning all about how the body works, then you might also like episode 64, where we explain metabolism and its role in weight loss.